what's up with this tiny little hole on the end of the ruler? In fact, why do we have even smaller little ones on the blue thing right there and a hidden one over on the other side? There's this little pointy thing on the end here, and the ruler kind of divots down and then goes back out again at the very end. There's notches on the other side. I'm going to need an explanation.
Ooh, great questions, Intro Corn. That'll get people interested to watch past those very important first 30 seconds to find out. Gonna juice the algorithm. I like the way you're thinking, bud. My name's Cornelius Quiring. Keep it moving, Editing Corn. Now, anyone who sews understands the basic function of this ruler, and that's this blue slidey bit here. It's where the name comes from, sewing gauge. Essentially what it allows me to do is to take a measurement. So I've got this bottom hem here. I slide up my ruler, and it's about 1/2 inch, and I can basically take this measurement now, and then when I roll up the other side, I can go ahead and transfer that measurement over, and it'll be nice and even. Or maybe I want to take off 1 inch, so I set my own measurement, and then I butt that up against the edge, and I can go around and make sure it's nice and even and consistent. Now, interestingly, a lot of people have mentioned that this little blue bit here doesn't stay in place on their sewing gauges. The reason mine stays in place is you can see there's like a little bit of like a metal piece on the inside there. Essentially, it acts as like a bit of a spring to push the plastic out in each direction up against the edges of the little slidey bit here, so that way it doesn't move. And I'm assuming if it doesn't, either that bit has been lost or it's a cheap one that doesn't have that to begin with. Fun fact, a lot of the old ones from the 60s and so on have this blue bit made out of metal as opposed to plastic, like mine here. But all the other bits, I had no clue. So I went to the old Googles. Business Corn here to remind you that I have pattern drafting courses available. That URL right there. But every blog that was talking about sewing gauges only ever just mentioned this little slidey gauge bit, which, well, we all know at this point. But then I discovered this thing called Google Patents. Which has just a list of a whole bunch of patents throughout history, and I managed to find quite a few. In fact, I found one that even dated back to 1894. So, these suckers have been around for a while. Anyways, I read through a bunch of them, and here's what I discovered. These little notches here are meant to be ways of making even markings at regular intervals. Let's say, for example, I wanted to make some pleats. I could do markings by just putting my pencil in, marking out, so on and so forth, and I know they'll be nice and even and consistent. Now, using these markings, I can go ahead and line those puppies up, press that down. There we go, that's a pleat. There we go. And continue on, if I so pleased and wasn't just doing a demo right now. And surely, I figured there must be a reason why the notches are exactly 1 inch apart, but couldn't find anything in the patents. And then I found one of the patents had the little notches every 1/2 inch. So I've come to the conclusion that it's mainly just because 1 inch is an even, clean number and something people are probably often marking off. As for these little holes on the side of the little blue thing, based on the patents, what they're for is little openings to make markings with. I've got a pencil here, and it doesn't even really seem to fit in the hole. This side is even smaller, so it definitely doesn't fit through. But it also said in the patent that it could be used to put needles in to hold this in place. If I line up this sewing gauge with another ruler, the inches perfectly line up, which is great. But if I'm marking in the little blue hole there, I'm actually going
beyond the inch mark. So I guess I could technically push it forward slightly and then make a marking.
Business corn here again. Save 10% on your next sewing machine and sewing supplies over at Quality Sewing.
Now as for the pinning feature, I can go ahead and put that in there, and then I can slide this back and forth. But I'm not sure why I would do that, because it requires me to have some thick fabrics underneath that I can actually pin into, and there's quite a bit of give there. So I'm struggling to figure a reason to do this, but perhaps someone in the comments can let me know why this is a useful feature. I guess theoretically if I have like fabric going underneath, I can just keep it in one place, put something underneath, slide it, push fabric along, slide it. Yeah, interesting. As for this little point in the corner here, it's meant to turn fabric the right way around. So after I've sewn a corner and snipped off my edge, go ahead and fold that, stick my finger in and turn it the right way around. But it always leaves a bit of a rounded corner. Take my little seam gauge, put it in there, and then use that point to push it out nice and square. And there we go. Squared up my corner. Mine has this on the side. Some seam gauges have it pointing out to the front. This little hole at the end here, I couldn't find anything in the patents, but someone in the comments once told me it was good for using this as a compass. So I can take a needle and poke it in the end here by that hole, and then I choose however big I want to make my circle or arc. Then I take my marker and I basically push it up against the edge here, and then I can go ahead and draw that in like so. So it works decently, but again, gotta have something underneath so I can actually poke it in, and as you can see, this is not very accurate. There's definitely quite a bit of play there. So if I wanted something accurate, I might want to consider using a protractor, but in a pinch, this works. Business corn? Is that you? If you want to support my efforts, why not join me over on Patreon or join me as a member here on YouTube? And there's all different kinds of perks for the different tiers available. And then, as for the reason for it dipping in here, well, A, it's so that I can have my point to turn the corners, but also it goes out far enough here so that this is the amount of standard seam allowance. If I hold that up to my ruler there, that is 5/8 of an inch. So I can hold my ruler up against the edge of the fabric and mark in 5/8 of an inch of seam allowance. Apparently the reason 5/8 of an inch is the standard seam allowance, and I have to give credit to a commenter who recently educated me about this, so thank you to whoever you are. The reason 5/8 is standard is because it allows us to go back 1/2 an inch and still leave 1/8 of an inch of seam allowance. So, two pieces of fabric go together, 1/2 an inch on each side. That means there's up to 1 inch that can be brought back into the garment. Now you've got 2 seams on each side of, say, a pair of pants. Well, that means 1 + 1, that's 2 inches. So with 5/8 of seam allowance, that means up to 2 inches can be brought back into the garment should it need be. So, there we go. Interestingly, the 1894 patent didn't have a slider in it, but rather a series of small holes where this little nib bit basically pops and snaps into each one of the holes. There appear to be quite a few of them, so you can have quite a few options, but doesn't allow for completely custom measurements the way this sliding one does. And then in general, from one patent to the next, there's slight tweaks and variations.
in the actual sewing gauges themselves, but these ones that I showed you tend to be the main core features. I think a good way to think of this ruler is as the Swiss Army of the sewing world. I personally find the sewing gauge feature to be the most useful one. Candidly, it's the only one I ever actually use. Some of them are decent, could be useful in the moment, and others, I'll be honest, are a little bit of a gimmick, not that useful. I always think it's better to get the proper tools to do the job right, but, you know, in a pinch, could be useful. Anyways, that's another video you could watch. By the way, got a new hat. I do quite like this this beige color. Looks nice against the backdrop, unlike the black one which just blended in. But anyways,